Today I'm thinking about Peter. Again, you might say, because Peter, of course, was the one who we focused on in the Garden of Gethsemane. But today it's a different story. Well, it's a bit of the same story, insofar as Peter is the one character, apart from Jesus, who goes right through every aspect of the story of Holy Week. So this from Mark chapter 14. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the teachers of the law came together. Peter followed at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. "You were also with that Nazarene Jesus, weren't you?" she said. But he denied it. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, and went out into the entryway. When the servant girl saw him there again, she said to those standing around, "This fellow's one of them." Again he denied it. After a while, those standing near said to Peter, "Surely you are one of them. You're a Galilean." He began to call down curses, and he swore to them, "I don't know this man that you're talking about." And immediately the cock crowed the second time, and Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken to him before, when he said, "Before the cock crows twice, you will disown me 3 times." And Peter broke down and wept. You'd almost think that the writer of Mark's Gospel had it in for Peter, because Peter comes out looking, well, not the ideal disciple in these stories of the first Holy Week. And yet, after Gethsemane, he's still there with Jesus. I mean, it gives us an interesting insight into Peter's character. The most obvious thing that he was actually there, and as far as we know, none of the other disciples were. And this was absolutely characteristic of Peter. He was always there. He was out in front. He was courageous. And more than that, he was recognizable as a disciple. He'd been with Jesus right from the start, when he first met Jesus by the Sea of Galilee, and he was captivated by this grand vision of a world transformed into God's way of doing things. The kingdom of God, if you like. He was one of the people who was always recognizable as a disciple. And of course, on this occasion, that's when the trouble started. The very thing that you might have thought Peter would be proud of, that people recognized him as one of Jesus' disciples, that the grand vision had become so incorporated into his own life that it was obvious that he was following Jesus. That was the very thing that should have encouraged him. It was the very thing that caught him out unawares. And as I reflect on this story, a couple of things have struck me. First of all, that discipleship is a journey. You remember Peter's call back in the first chapter of Mark's Gospel, when Jesus absolutely captivated his imagination. And Peter was grabbed by this grand vision of a different way of being, a new way of being, God's way of being. And then he had many experiences as he walked alongside Jesus, as he listened to what Jesus was saying, as he heard the stories, as he saw the healings, the encounters that transformed people's lives. And then they got to Caesarea Philippi in the very middle of Mark's Gospel, and Jesus asks him, "By the way," he says, "what do you think's going on here? Who do you think I am?" And Peter, of course, says all the right things. He says, "Yeah, you're the Messiah, the Son of God. I'll tick all the boxes." I'm not suggesting he was frivolous in saying he ticked the boxes. He was serious, insofar as he understood what that meant. But then he finds himself in the garden of the high priest, a different environment, this time a more hostile environment. And he never actually denied any of the things that he said he believed about Jesus. So he's not in an argument with this servant girl about whether Jesus was the Messiah or Jesus' teachings. It just suddenly had no longer become cool to be associated with Jesus. And there was something deep within Peter's psyche that needed to be part of something that was what we would say today, cool. Peter ultimately was on a journey of faith. I guess that's where I want to focus and what I want to say the rest of this reflection, because I'm wondering if today we are now facing, as individual Christians, our own high priest garden, if you like. The first question that occurs to me is this one. Would anybody recognize us as Jesus' disciples? Would anyone come up to us and say, "You're one of them"? Do we have a vision that's big enough to have attracted the likes of Peter in the first place? Would Peter come into any of our churches and say, yes, this grand vision of transformation, a new way of doing things, a new way of being, is something that can captivate my imagination and indeed demand my life? That's a difficult question to answer when you think about it. Then the other thing that surprises me in a sense is that it's widely recognized that Mark's Gospel, while it's come through many different kind of versions and media presentations to arrive at the form that it now has, it's widely believed that it had something to do with the way Peter initially told some of these stories. And yet he still included this story. When you think about it, he was the only obvious source of this story that was present to have been able to tell it. And he tells this story against himself, you might say. I wonder if he was happy to tell it just because it's so true to human experience that even Peter, who seems to be a great disciple, he struggled to be true to his core values. I think openness about our struggles, whatever they're about, is actually central to effective Christian witness in today's world. People often say, well, you Christians are a bunch of hypocrites, because they can see through our pretense. They can see through the masks that we wear. They can see something that we often forget, namely that we struggle as Christians, as followers of Jesus. We struggle with exactly the same things that other people struggle with. And in that context, we have something to share with others, not because we're different, but precisely because we're no different. Our relationships might easily go off the cliff edge at any time. We struggle with the same attitudes that many other people struggle with. We struggle to see how the world can be and can become a better place. Some of us struggle to really think of an answer to this question, who actually is Jesus? We have something to share, I think, not because we're different, but we're no different. And that needs to be at the heart of everything we think of as mission. I suggested yesterday that the church might be in Gethsemane right now. I wonder, could it be that the high priest's garden is where many of us find ourselves? Still kind of believing, not wanting to give up on faith and following Jesus, but somehow it's no longer cool, or we imagine it's no longer cool, to follow Jesus. Or rather, if I put it a different way and said it's no longer cool to be a church person, that might be nearer the reality. Faith is always a journey. Faith was a journey for Peter. And this isn't the end of his story by a long way, because we need to continue the story. If we're thinking about Peter, continue the story through into the book of Acts, where eventually he regrets distancing himself from Jesus. He regrets some of the things that he got wrong, and he eventually finds fulfillment as he embarks on a missionary enterprise, not that dissimilar to the great St. Paul. But that's a story for another day. I think the thing I take out of this story here today is those two questions. The question on the one hand, would I be recognizable as a disciple of Jesus? Would anybody ask me those questions if I was in the equivalent of a high priest's garden? And yes, mission. It's not about saying, I've got it, you need it. It's actually about saying, look, life is tough. Life is difficult. But following Jesus really does make a difference. Do you believe that? God bless you on this second day of Holy Week. And I hope you'll come back for more reflections tomorrow.